And good morning. It's time for the Mike Hewitt Show, brought to you by Renegade River in Spring Lake. And here's your host, Mike Hewitt.
Hey, good morning and welcome. Listen, I was really torn this morning. I didn't know whether to call this Vladimir Lenin's birthday show or Earth Day, or just call it the Coincidences and Unintended Consequences show. What do you think, Jim Riley?
Well, I'd like any one of those. I kind of maybe the Ira Einhorn show, one of the founders of the Earth Day movement.
Along with Gaylord Nelson, the senator?
Well, he was along with many others, but he's the only one who murdered his girlfriend and hid her body and lived a few decades, actually, afterwards in Europe. And is still actually, believe it or not, celebrated. Yeah, very, very wealthy young man at the time, was probably the single most important founder of the Earth Day movement, and that little touchy, I guess, over girlfriends. So he was able to in his term, probably put her down. That's the beginning. Well, think about it. If you've got, well, that's exactly what he did, and he and of course Vladimir Lenin.
Nice people.
That's the from these roots, from these little acorns, the giant oak of the eco movement has arisen, and we celebrate it today.
Now, you saw that, by the way, when I posted this on Twitter, which is Twitter at Talk Mike Hewitt, when I posted the show the other day, someone copied the link, obviously someone who doesn't agree with my position, and copied it and suggested that I was being really shallow. And along with that, the person posted a link that was to debunk coincident with Earth Day being on Lenin's birthday. And so I read through the debunk because I think it's important to see. Maybe it's not a coincidence. Maybe it is. I really don't know. Thank God I can't get in the head of these folks that came up with it. But when I look back at the coincidences, some of them are pretty overwhelming. The original Earth Day was the month before. It was March 21st. And Nelson and the fellow that you're talking about and a handful of other people,
Ira Einhorn, moved
it forward to April 22nd. And so the debunk points out that Lenin's birthday wasn't actually on April 22nd. The problem with the debunk is that it doesn't recognize that the Soviet Union embraced the Gregorian calendar. And so using the Gregorian calendar, it was on April 22nd. And then if you go back to watch Nikita Khrushchev, who in 1955 referred to it as going to be a Lenin celebration day. And I don't know that I can say the word. Maybe you can. Sabodnik. I don't know how to say the word. Subbotnik. It's a Russian word, obviously. And what it talks about is a day of unpaid labor. And the idea behind this Soviet holiday they caused it to be in celebration of Lenin's birthday, the idea was to get folks to do voluntary road cleanup, picking up trash, and that kind of thing. So now it's certainly a good thing. You and I are both old enough, Brian also, we're old enough to remember when you'd see big piles of trash on the side of the road, and especially out in the country, it wasn't uncommon to pass refrigerators and stacks of tires and all kinds of stuff that people just backed up and dumped off on the shoulders of the road.
Oh yeah, and thus the tear from the Native American on that.
Yeah,
and so the old TV ad, right, with the Native American with the headdress on, where he didn't have a headdress on, but he had the feather. And the tear coming down because of the way that we Americans had been throwing trash out in some areas, not obviously all areas.
So to me, when I look at this, first off, it isn't possible to ignore the similarities between what Nikita Khrushchev in Russia did, honoring Lenin with a free labor day. By the way, it wasn't an environmental day because nobody's going to call Lenin or Nikita Khrushchev environmentalists. They just weren't. That's not who they were. But they did like socialism and free labor, and that's what their day was to celebrate. And they picked up. They promoted the concept of having citizens get used to the concepts of free labor. Literally, that's what that was their track of thought, and they articulated it, so we don't have to guess. And then here, when you've got Nelson and Ira, is that the person's name? Ira
Einhorn, correct.
They went, wow, what a great concept. We think we can turn this in. It was called a teach-in initially. And I remember being in elementary school, by the way, when they were talking about the first Earth Day, and I was a little kid, and they made a big thing out of it. Now listen, I'm on one hand, it's like putting sugar in my coffee or something like that. Anything in moderation is fine. Anything too much is not so much a good thing anymore.
There we go. Yes, great point.
And when I look at this, do I want junk on the sides of the road? And I'm with that commercial that talked about the Indian with a tear on his cheek. I really am. I remember refrigerators and stoves and just junk everywhere out in the country where people had driven in from the city and dumped that stuff off. That's the way it was for young folks that weren't old enough to remember 60s way of life and before that. So what came out of that was great, but we went just too far. From this whole thing came the EPA and a bunch of other things.
Well, yes, and I agree with everything that you've said, and I'd just like to add, junk on the road is certainly an issue, but junk on the road is something that can be picked up by anybody. What was going on after the Industrial Revolution in the world and was addressed really at first in the United States was pollution by corporations, by companies, by governments, local and state here, and the federal governments in the United States, and, of course, by individuals with automobiles that had very poor mileage because gasoline was very inexpensive, and leaded gas. But the biggest issue, and I think the one that got most people behind it, was the fact that our air was heavily polluted.
Oh, big pictures of Los Angeles or New York where you couldn't even see the tops of buildings.
Well, you had that, which was perhaps at its worst, but anyone who lives in Michigan...
And still have it in China when our government pretends that they should squelch our economies even further, but do business with China because they'll catch up somewhere down the road.
Well, even today on Earth Day, actually, 100 years, interestingly, after Lenin's birth, was the first Earth Day. So this is a long time coming. But even today, the vast majority of the Earth, in particular in countries that are totalitarian or communist controlled, they still have a murderous, deadly pollution. But I think the important thing is you didn't need to go out to California. You didn't need to go, like I just did recently, to go out even to Denver to see the pollution in the air. All you needed to do, if you lived here in West Michigan, was take good old 94 over to Chicago. And if you drove by the steel mills, if you drove, even today there's an odor, but if you drove by Gary, Indiana, you could smell it, you could see it, you could feel it. It made you feel uncomfortable. That was a very big and very legitimate issue. The folks behind Earth Day, I don't know what their ultimate goal was, but certainly we needed a national organization, a national plan, national mindset to say, hey, wait a minute, we've got to stop the industrial pollution like we had up in the White Lake area and other places within Muskegon County where you just had these barrels of very deadly and dangerous chemicals leaking out, and, of course, doing something to work with the air. Now, guess what? Because of capitalism, because we've had excess profits, or not excess, but companies have had the ability to have profits. Individuals have worked so that they can all be taxed, and those profits have been turned back into making our corporations cleaner, making our vehicles cleaner, and take a look at the air outside. Right now, one of the reasons that the environmental movement shifted over to declaring CO2 as a pollutant, which of course CO2 is natural in our air, was because going after particulate in the air, going after the various dangerous things that might cause somebody to have breathing problems in the United States, it is almost 100% gone. That they've fixed it. They have succeeded. What did they do once they succeeded? They went and decided to go on to something else, essentially to shut down, if you will, the entire capitalistic economy of the world, if they could.
For me, what really gets me is I think the original folks, and I can't put my head in theirs and know what their thought process was, and I can't know that, but it went from let's clean the trash off the sides of the roads to within just 2 or 3 years it went to the coming ice age. And what happened is that two groups of people, in my mind, merged. From the research I've been able to do, you had the folks that really wanted to get the trash off the roads, and I don't know if they were co-opted or merged. Frankly, I don't know that. But I think that the socialists, and I mean this most literally, the uber left, not just leftists, not just Democrats, the uber left, these folks that would want to celebrate Lenin's birthday, by the way, came up with the coming ice age, and they looked at this as a way to start leveling off the economies of the world. I really believe that.
Well, communism, of course, is the antithesis. It's the opposite of capitalism. The communists want to bring down capitalism. Matter of fact, there's a new, just in today's M Live, they're exposing a new class at University of Michigan, which teaches that capitalism is dangerous for the world.
Here's the fun part.
So they still hate capitalism.
Here's the fun part. I'm waiting to come on today, and I'm getting emails on my iPad. One of the emails I get is spam from a mortgage company that says, Earth Day special, recycle your old mortgage.
Oh, love it.
I love the concept that capitalism is glomming onto this. The same way, frankly, that capitalism is glommed onto a lot of things, like global warming. And we've talked about in the past, there's global warming on all of this is a fun thing, by the way, global warming is happening on most of the planets in our solar system. And I'm thinking to myself, how do they know that, since they really can't confirm that it's even happening here? And if they could confirm it, is it the fault of my Jeep and the coal burners?
Yes.
It is the fault of the coal burners.
Yes.
Yes, it is all their fault.
Well, that seems to be their particular argument at this point.
So we should drop back to the Civil War era technology before my Jeep. And the irony being what it is that if we keep going back and back and back, the pollution gets worse and worse and worse.
No, that's not their argument. Their argument is that if we give more money and more control
this is
to
about
governments...
Jim, are you telling me this is about power and money?
No,
come on. This is about the environment. Don't you let folks
The
think
only
that
way to
this
fix
is anything but keeping our air clean.
The only way to keep the air clean, to keep the groundwater clean,
is to take my money.
Is if we Americans vote ourselves to tax ourselves more and to tax our corporations and businesses more, take that money, give it to various governments. We even have certainly local city and township interest in getting some of these tax dollars. Those then government bureaucrats, the same bureaucrats, by the way, who are in charge of the potholes in our roads within the state, those bureaucrats will take that money and they will wisely invest it in clean energy alternatives, much like windmills and solar power and turning poop into energy types of things. Now, that's the promise. But keep in mind that the promises that were made on Earth Day, the first Earth Day in 1970, were that if we do not clean the earth and do this transfer of wealth to governments, we will be facing an ice age.
Now, do you think the folks back then, 1970, coming up with Earth Day, coincidentally on Lenin's 100th, not just his birthday, but the 100th celebration was huge in the Soviet Union, celebrating his 100th birthday. I mean, it was monumental. They made a big deal about it, planned for it for years in advance. But was it a coincidence that we picked that day here? Actually changed it from March 21st to be on his day 1 month later?
Is it a nobody could know. I would agree with you. I would think,
like I say, somebody
did have.
I think they had their eye on the ball.
Yeah.
But again, somebody on Twitter thinks that I'm being shallow for the suggestion.
Well, the problem with that is that you can't prove it, and neither can they. It's a conjecture. To the best of my knowledge, no one has come out and said, "Hey, we are the organizers of Earth Day, and we picked this day because it's on this birthday." So we can assume it, and I would agree with you. It seems like it's true, but there is no real smoking gun there.
You're right. There is conjecture, except for to say that it was on the 21st of March, and within that month it got moved, or actually it got co-opted. That's a better way of a more direct and earnest way of saying it. It got co-opted and then reestablished on April 22nd today. To me, it's just there are 365 days it could have been. And he would have had to rush, or I shouldn't say he, they would have had to rush this plan together to get it to go. But again, he called it a teach-in. Supposedly it wasn't supposed to be all that it's become. So maybe it is the sugar analogy that I use, that anything sweet is okay until you get really carried away with big old gigantic teaspoons of it.
Well, we know that nonetheless what the rationale was. We do know this, that the environmental movement then and the environmental movement today are openly, clearly, and loudly anti-capitalist.
So you're saying they are socialists?
No, well, I'd say they're communist. The socialism in and of itself is very benign. It can be benign. Certainly, we have a socialist country directly north of us called Canada. So
these are Marxists.
I would say these are Marxists. These are communist because the only way, and as we just talked about here, the only possible way that you can deliver their agenda is to use a totalitarian form of enforcement. In other words, we've been asked, give more money on your own to the various environmental organizations. Certainly people do, but according to them, not enough. The only way that the environmental movement in its current form today can expand is if it convinces people to allow government to forcefully enter into their lives, forcefully take money from themselves and from their corporations and put it in environmental goals.
See, when I read
that's totalitarianism.
It is but actually in reality, if you look at our uber left, again, I'm not talking about your average Democrat, but if you look at the uber left, they're actually fascists by definition, and I say that because Marxism does not necessarily call for the force of it, although I know the Communist Party advanced that. But to me, when I look at it, everything that they're doing, like, for instance, we've talked in the past, where if they don't like what you're saying, they don't want to debate you and take you to the arena of ideas. They want to shut you down.
Or just like what's happening with the movie American Sniper,
right.
Which, the organization gets its power by shouting down any alternative voices. You bet.
Listen, we're going to go to a break, but when we come back, we're going to pick up there, and we're also going to talk a little bit about the coming vote, because I think that fits into some of this. Folks, we'll be right back.
Renegade River in Spring Lake wants to buy your used handguns and hunting guns. Renegade River, your hunting, camping, and survival store. Stop in and check out their new and used firearms, sporting goods, Army and Navy supplies, and survival gear. Downtown Spring Lake, next to the police station.
Welcome back to the Mike Hewitt Show, sitting in with Jim Riley, and we're talking about, what the heck are we talking about, Jim? Unintended consequences?
Well, I know that you want to go to that. Can I just throw a couple quick quotes? Because, again,
Brian, who could ever stop him? Think
who
about
could ever
that.
Stop me? That's right. Well, I just think you're talking about unintended consequences, and just some quotes that were made on the first Earth Day, all right, or they're within just a few weeks anyway. Quote, this is a Harvard biologist. Harvard, of course, they're all smarter than the rest of us. Quote, civilization will end within 15 or 30 years unless immediate action is taken against problems facing mankind. Now,
is that Igor?
No, this is Harvard biologist George Wald, your good buddy George Wald. Al Gore was not doing any of this in the 70s. He was a congressman back then.
Well, that's a pretty broad thing. Problems facing mankind?
Well, this all has to do with the environmental problems.
But listen, Igor made a lot of the same claims.
But not in the 70s, not in 1970.
No, he waited until the 80s.
He waited until, actually, it didn't really get going till around 2000. But here we go. Now, here's another one. This is Paul Ehrlich, who continues. He's around today, writes all sorts of books, very renowned scientist of some note. Quote, most of the people, remember, this was written in 1970, most of the people who are going to die in the greatest cataclysm in the history of man have already been born. By 1975, some experts feel that the food shortages will have escalated the present level of world hunger and starvation into famines of unbelievable proportions. Other experts, remember these are experts, other experts more optimistic think the ultimate food population collision will not occur until the decade of the 1980s. Now, this is a guy who continues to be
I remember them
believed.
teaching that stuff.
Yes,
in my
do
4th, 5th, and 6th grade.
Yep.
Literally up on the chalkboard, and I had pictures of huge, gigantic world populations, and it was a really big, crazy theme at the time. And I think to me, when I look at some of those things, they're a get out the vote drive. You know, it's almost, some of it's become cliche. This is the most important election of your lifetime. You've got to vote. Listen, I typically agree with that. I think voting is huge, but I don't know that when I look at those kind of quotes, that is anything but fear tactics designed to gin up money from the uber left.
Well, you know what? I agree with you 100%, but I do believe...
How unusual is that, Brian?
I do believe that these folks had some level of belief in what they were saying, because remember this, if you are, in fact, if you're a radio host, or if you are an author, or you're out there in front of people, and you're saying something's going to happen within your lifetime, it's one thing today, to say in 2150, everyone will be dead. But these folks were predicting within just 5 to 10 years of the time that they said it, some cataclysmic results. So I do believe that at the time, within their own mania, that they had some belief it was going to happen. Now, clearly, they were full of beans. Clearly, millions upon millions of people believed them. And as you said, clearly that message wasn't just picked up by some, kind of vegan crazies. That message was picked up and taught to children in our public schools. And these people still seem to have some level of credibility. To me, it's astounding.
But to me, I attach it all to global warming, which became global climate change when it was obviously not global warming.
Absolutely.
And then when global climate change didn't ring the bell loud enough, it became global climate change crisis. And to me, I think it all goes to getting the uber left out the vote and to raise money.
Absolutely.
Period. That's everything about this is obviously smoke and mirror science.
Well,
people like Igor stands up there after flying a dozen of his buddies all on independent.
Now, by Igor, you mean Al Gore?
No, Igor. He's Igor.
Well,
you
okay,
call him
but
whatever
just for
you want.
folks who don't know, I just want to let people. Al Gore, the ex-vice president, who is the guy who won a Academy Award for his movie.
His movie was outrageous.
Well, it was very effective.
I heard you talking about
moment.
it. In Great Britain, they would not allow it to be labeled as a documentary. You saw that?
Yes, I did. Yes,
because it's filled with nonsense and nuttiness.
Well, but it was effective nonsense and nuttiness, just like communism is filled with nonsense and nuttiness. And my golly, it controlled one of the largest countries in the world for 70 years.
Communism?
You bet.
Certainly not Igor. And I call him Igor for a handful of reasons, by the way. First is Igor, because at the time it looked like he was...
You have to be old to know what Igor is.
He looked like Clinton's Igor. Plus, he invented the Internet, remember? So then it became E-Gore because he did invent the Internet.
Okay, I like that.
He's Igor.
I'm glad you explained that.
Yeah, he's.
But you wanted to talk about unintended consequence, and I think that this is a good segue because there are unintended consequences of Earth Day. Everybody's for clean stuff, but are there unintended consequences? Of course, we've got another unintended consequence, perhaps in the making.
We've got a couple. Listen, before we get into the May 5th vote, which I want to touch on just a little bit in this show, because next week, frankly, the temporary name of next week's show will be the Just Vote No Show.
I love it.
I think
Just vote no.
The Just No.
Where's Nancy Reagan when we need her?
Isn't it a hoot? But in the meantime, you talked about a different vote coming up. I heard you on the morning show. And you were talking about, is there some kind of environmental vote coming up that we should be aware of? What were you talking about?
I'm not aware. No.
Okay. Other vote.
Perhaps I misspoke. No. There's no vote that I'm aware of.
Folks, I got the deer in the headlight look.
Yeah. Well, let's face it. Let's be clear now. Votes on very critically important environmental issues in terms of particulate matter in the air, CO2, and things of that sort are being made, not just votes, actually it's more a waving of the wand of the EPA administrator. But we are, of course, seeing the closing down of our local power plant, which will happen next year, and the loss of millions upon millions upon millions of tax dollars and jobs being lost, and the profits and benefits that come from those jobs. And, of course, we will then be reliant upon fewer and fewer and fewer power plants, so that in the event of a catastrophe of some sort, be it a terrorist catastrophe or a man-made catastrophe or an environmental, earthquake, tidal wave, tornado, who knows, we will be dependent upon fewer choices for our power. So, yeah, that's a unintended consequence that's going to happen down the pipe. But I think you were talking about something else.
In 2006, Igor said that we have less than 10 years, according to, and this is him citing whoever leading scientists are.
Less than 10 years.
Less than 10 years, and this is the spring of 2006. According to him, he says, according to leading scientists, we have less than 10 years before we cross a point of no return.
Well, like you said, they say things that get your attention. Time magazine will have on their cover, mastodons and ice age fears.
Because we didn't drop the amount of carbon in the atmosphere by 0.3%. That's probably that was what happened.
Yeah, that's true. But when you stand back and look at global warming, the climate change, the crisis, they're forecasting a 2% raise in temperature over a long period of time, a 2-degree raise. And so if you look at that, that could be catastrophic, or it may not even be a bad thing. But the irony to it is that it's the arrogance that they're suggesting that humankind has the capacity to have an effect on that.
Well, it'd be one thing if they had any level of history of successful predictions. The reality is that virtually every prediction that these folks have made has failed, has been actually the opposite. We do know this. I still see people repeating some of the reports that were totally misread, that the 2015 was the hottest year on record. It was not, as a matter of fact. The organization that did that report, at the bottom of it, said we have like 35% belief that these numbers are true. In other words, these are all computer models. It's not happening. But the reality is that Americans in particular do believe that we need and want to have a good environment. We want to be good stewards of our lands. And when we are told by people who we believe are telling us the truth. I mean, my gosh, you went to Harvard, you're elected as a senator, you're the president of the United States, the first black president of the United States. When they come on and publicly tell us, both of them for that matter, when they tell us that, in fact, you must do these things or terrible, terrible things will happen, I don't blame Americans for saying, well, geez, okay, maybe, I've got a life. I'm not an expert on this, but all these experts tell us something. Then we go ahead and we support them. The problem is, at some point, we have to start saying, wait a minute, these people have been predicting things that have not happened.
Listen, the fun part about
maybe fixing our roads if we give them $2 billion extra.
The fun part about predictions with weather is that if you predict change, you're going to be right.
Well, that's why climate change. The funny thing is, the folks who went from global warming, then go to global climate change, and no one out there is suggesting in any way, shape, or form that the climate isn't changing. It is only the enviro nuts and, of course, the entire Democrat Party that says, no, give us money, and we will stop climate change. Think about that.
If you look at the history of the United States, which in the great sphere of things is not long, it's your 200 and some years is just not this, huge amount of period of time, and yet within that window of our existence, as a former United States of America, you've had at least 2 global warming periods and at least 2 what they referred to as mini ice ages, because things are cyclic, and they'd have nothing to do with my Jeep. And absolutely nothing to do with it.
Well, there's a reasonable belief. I would say right now that we
most of
continue
it's
to
sun,
study it.
Most of it is the sun.
Well, there is a belief, and from everything that I've read, you certainly can correlate the sun's and sunspot activity on these massive changes over the eons. We still do not know. That's the point where Al Gore went out and said the science is settled. That is the idiocy at a level that certainly befits him. But the reality is that we need to continue to study it. We need to continue to do smart things. We do know this at some point. We will run out of fossil fuels. So it makes sense to continue the research. Fossil fuels today are the bridge to whatever the next generation of energy may be. And we need to be, we don't want to pollute. We want to be smart about it. Hopefully we don't want to continue to be dependent upon Saudi Arabia and countries that hate us.
Let me stop you there. If we didn't want to be dependent on them, we would seek our own resources here in the United States, of which we've got plenty of. But the very folks we're talking about, it's such an interesting thing. The very folks that we're talking about, the uber left, they'll tie our hands and handcuff us from using our own resources, as if somehow using the resources in Saudi Arabia will save the global atmosphere, and it's different if we're burning their oil versus our oil.
Well, that's a really good point, because we do know this, that in communist China, which is run by a military dictatorship, in communist China, they are building, I believe, one new coal-powered power plant every day. Every single day, in a country of what, 2 billion, 3 billion? Some enormous population. In the United States, if we shut down every single power plant, if we shut down every single factory, we would not be able to reduce the CO2, and this, of course, is all about CO2, the CO2 production that China is adding in just a few months.
Listen, before I forget, I've got to do a real brief public address, if you will. Ottawa County Patriots.
Oh, yes.
They're having an event tomorrow evening on the ballot Proposal 1. And in fact, they've titled it on May 5, vote yes or vote no. Hearing contrasting perspectives, decide for yourself. Speakers in favor of the group will be Tom Bird, who is an Ottawa County Road Commissioner, and Steve, how do you say that name? Is that Boltice?
I would say Boltice, yeah.
Boltice, who's the president of Macataw Area Coordinating Council. Speakers opposed to it are State Representative Cindy Gamrett from Plainwell and State Representative Todd Cursor from Lapeer. This dialogue that they're going to have is pretty open forum, and one thing I like about the Patriots, they are definitely conservative Tea Party type folks, but they go out of their way to make their events give both sides of the debate. And that's what tomorrow evening will be. So if you're on the bubble and you can't decide what you're going to do, you may want to attend this tomorrow, Thursday, 7 p.m. It's going to be at the New Life Fellowship Church, which is at 12960 James Street down in Holland. It's James near Beeline. They're going to have refreshments served, and again, they're going to have these four people, and I know all of them, are pretty good speakers.
Well, you have two state reps who were involved, at least now, are involved in how this will be handled if it's passed.
One of the neat things about these two state reps, other than I shouldn't say yes, other than they are no votes, is that they weren't involved in it, because this ballot proposal was authored in the lame duck session, and the folks that penned it, they're not in office anymore. And so there's always one of those questions: would the new session have put this? Would the new legislature have advanced this? And my answer is I don't think they would. I don't think they would have, but that's just conjecture. And at any rate, I think this is going to be one heck of a good program. I'm going to be there. My mind is made up. On the other hand, I do want to hear both sides, because I don't understand the reasoning of someone that would look at this and say, yeah, I'm going to do that. I really honestly don't get it. I think jerking $2 billion out of the citizens' pockets is going to have an immediate impact on the economy and on inflation.
Well, think about that. Yeah, and again, it's not citizens. Yes, you're going to pay a little bit more. You might pay $200 or $600 or what have you more, which of course is an imposition. But the problem is, do you have a job? Do you have any family members or any friends who are employed? Because the bulk of this tax increase is going to fall on the backs of those previously tax-paying businesses and employers throughout our state. So if you believe that taking $2 billion in good measure right out of the profits of Michigan businesses, if you think that's a good idea, then vote for it.
I got to tell you on that point, if the economy was roaring, I would be a no vote, because I think this is wrong-headed thinking. Now, that said, the economy isn't roaring. It is really a fragile economy right now. And we keep hearing about job growth. A lot of that job growth is very low paying, and in most cases, not many, in most cases, they're part-time jobs. Those things don't lend itself to a robust economy that we should say, hey, jeepers, let's extort. I hate to use that word, not so much. I don't hate it at all, because that's the truth. Let's extort $2 billion out of the system.
Well, what is extortion? Extortion is simply making a threat that if you don't give me your money, bad things will happen to
Absolutely.
you. You're darn
That's
right.
why I'm
this
calling
is
it that
extortion.
word.
You bet.
You know, in those commercials, we've talked about this before, and we're definitely going to dive into it one item at a time next Wednesday. But when you watch the commercials of the the busload of kids going underneath the crumbling road. Folks, it's nonsense. It's insulting.
But that's the threat that our government is telling us, that if you don't give us $2 billion on May 5th, that your children in the bus are going to be subject. We saw the governor out there under a bridge with a hard hat holding a big chunk of rock.
Yeah.
Now, that's extortion.
Well, to me, I got to tell you, I think it's a special interest-driven thing. My rant, if you will, next week, and then our little talk right now, I'm not going to be talking about the governor specifically or anybody. I really want to push really hard against this item with facts, because I don't think this is personal. It's a cause issue driven thing. Most of the people that are actually paying for those ads you're referring to are special interest groups that will benefit from the pot of money we're being asked to pool.
You know, you bring up a really good point in terms of the way that this argument, this discussion, if you will, is being formed. On your side, and I would agree with this, let's get some facts as to why this is a good idea or a bad idea. But for the people who are on the pro side, the people who say this is a great idea, they're not coming out with facts. They're coming out with fear. They're telling us that our children are at risk, our cars are at risk.
I will tell you what.
I was going to just say, like you mentioned plans. Have they laid out how they're going to accomplish the road fixing projects with the money that they are going to be taxing us with?
Oh, isn't that a good question?
Like, we'll have the roads all done by 2017, 18, 19. Is there a plan? Do we have a plan of action to accomplish it? You know, what companies are doing this? How many jobs? Everything.
Mike, they've done that, right? Haven't they made this all out and told us what's going to happen?
Nope, they just pool the money. If we have more money, we can get it done. And the reason this fits in is, in my personal view, this falls right in with, if we have more money, we can fix the global warming crisis, climate change concept.
And if we don't, we're all going to die, too.
It's all the same fear.
It's the same plan.
Fear-driven mechanism that doesn't say, if you give me $2 billion, I can cool the economy Well, actually, they can. They're not saying that, but they will cool the economy.
Yeah, you cool the earth, not the economy.
Yeah, but the global warmists are saying, give me the money and we'll fix the problem without an incidental list, without defining any form of expectations. And by the way, one of the things I think that really twist voters up is exactly your point, Brian, because government, both parties, by the way, are a little bit remiss in identifying expectations that citizens can understand. And I think it goes exactly to your point. If they're going to fix the roads, they needed to lay out a plan and say, just to your point, it'll be done by X day. But it goes to the global warming people. They can't even predict what the weather will be next Wednesday, much less if we're in a cooling or a warming or a change. It's all nonsense.
But both organizations, both groups of advocates, if you will, are promising one thing. They're promising that if you don't give us more money and more power, not just bad things, terrible things, either the earth will end, everyone will starve, or in the case here of Michigan, your children are at terrible risk in their school buses.
It's scare tactics, and it sounds like campaign promises that never come to fruition.
I got a bingo going across there, baby.
To me, it's a real problem. But I don't. From my standpoint, though, a lot of these people, by the way, that are pro, that will be voting yes, they're personal friends of mine. I know them. I don't agree with them. In fact, I'll look at their voting records and think, Jake, you are really on a lot of issues, but we disagree on a couple of them very passionately, and this would be one of them. So, and I say that because truly, I'm not trying to take any individual to task, but I'm going to be a vote no. And next week, we're going to go through a big laundry list of exactly what we'll get if we waste $2 billion on this boondoggle. Folks, we're going to go to a break because we're late. We'll be right back.
Be a survivor, not a statistic. Renegade River in Spring Lake has new and used handguns, hunting guns, sporting goods, and survival gear. Protect your rights and your freedom. Ask about their CPL classes. Renegade River, next to the police station in downtown Spring Lake.
Welcome back to the Mike Hewitt Show. A little bit of inconvenient truth, unintended consequences.
Yeah.
Listen, when we were off, Brian, join us if you would. When we were at break, you said something I think is really important about success.
Well, it's up to the person in the mirror. It's not up to somebody else to hand you money or to blaming the one percenters. I think it's up to every individual to be self-reliant. It's to a best of their abilities, and not expect somebody else to carry them along or their situation is always somebody else's fault.
So it's like blaming. I think your words were, it's like blaming the quarterback for throwing a.
Yeah. You're blaming the rich for becoming successful and confiscating all the riches. It's about like blaming the star quarterback for throwing the winning touchdown.
Listen, I got to tell you,
which is what Woody Hayes actually did on field with a fellow who intercepted the pass on his team. Remember, he ran out on the field and popped him in the face at Ohio State.
You think he's a Democrat?
No, it's hard to say, but he was blaming the defender when
Listen,
in fact.
I got to tell you, I think that you're really onto something. Part of the unintended consequences of the changes in America that have taken place since April 22nd, 1970, is that we've become a very, very different cultural society. Our society has changed. Some of the examples, we got to make sure that you can stay on mommy and daddy's insurance until you're 26, versus where are all the entrepreneurs at? I think you put it best. People are more employment minded now than they used to be. Where you'd pull yourself up by your bootstraps and dig in and go start a business or become an entrepreneur. I have to tell you, I'm an entrepreneur. It's scary. I'm just telling you, folks, it really is. And for those folks that are in business, and you're driving down the road and you're listening, you know what I'm talking about. To stand back, and when I was talking about opening my retail store, and I'm looking at the amount of contact and involvement and oversight that I get from the various levels of government, jeepers, this has got very little to do with providing a quality product at a reasonable price and working with the consumer base. It's got vastly more to do with the government is here to help me. And that stops a lot of people who would normally be an entrepreneur say, oh, phooey, I'm just going to get a job and call it good.
Yeah. I don't think we need everybody to be an entrepreneur, just more of them. Just like a person in sales. Not everybody can be a successful salesperson. But
I think part of it
there's
goes,
enough population, there's enough segment of the population that does it well, and then just like starting a business.
No, but it's the same as the rich and the poor argument. To me, when I look at that debate, I'm not thinking to myself, jeepers, let's take all those rich people's money because they stole it from us. I'm looking the other way and saying, how can we make the poor people richer?
Right.
How can we raise these folks up? And
one way,
myself included, by the way, I'm not rich. How can we make more? More government is not on the path to richer.
Yeah, but Mike,
poor
exactly. Is the way to make people, give them the tools to raise themselves up, is the way to do that, to take more money out of their pockets, to take money out of the pockets of businesses? Of course, what do businesses do? In addition to employing people and paying taxes, businesses buy things. For instance, if you sell to Walmart or to Myers or what have you, the government intervention tends more often than not to inhibit people to start their own businesses because it's so hard to figure out how to get started.
Businesses contribute to the economy, but the other thing is that I guess these should be inspirations to people to see how they became successful, not shame on them for being that way. And it's like, if I can't have what you have, then you shouldn't have it either idea.
Yeah, well, and the concept of certainly wealthy people not paying their fair share or businesses not paying their fair share. We're getting kind of off the Earth Day message here, but it all
really. It all ties together.
It all ties together.
It's all part, and I don't know if it's unintended consequences or not. Quite frankly, I don't know whether the uber left that were part of that movement was socialism or Marxism. To your point, I don't know if this was their plan or not, and I don't. Frankly, think I want to give them that much credit since we still don't know what the degree of next Thursday will be in the weather. But on the other hand, I think unintended consequence can really be pointed directly to a society that's disengaged. Even groups like churches and Boy Scouts and all of those, they're less attended because people have really disengaged from the culture. That's why when you go to a restaurant and there's 4 people sitting, they're all on their iPad talking to other people somewhere else.
But see, those are old ideas. Those all Boy Scouts and
traditional
the progressives want to move on to new things because we can't do anything that we used to do because that can't be any good anymore.
Listen, I got to tell you, the folks that come into Renegade River, the younger people, 25, 30, 35-year-old group that are in my gun shop, by the way, that have never had an opportunity to be engaged in a community like what we're talking about right now, which is Boy Scouts and all of these groups that are slowly finding their numbers shrinking, they'll stand around and just enjoy the heck out of themselves because they've developed friendships and associations, and that's what communities are, and the loss of it is one of the other unintended consequences. It's where entrepreneurship went. It's where partnerships went, and all of the things that fostered making America great.
That's one of the reasons that there is truly, you want a war, there is a war against the individualism that was espoused by Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. You bet.
That was funny.
That was 3.5.
Was that 3.5?
Yeah, there we go.
Folks, I wished you could have saw that. I asked Brian how long, 3.5 minutes, but it was some fascinating signaling he was giving me.
Helen Keller would have been proud.
What does he mean? I need an interpreter. So now we're down to 3 minutes. The reason I asked is I want to remind folks that next week will be what I'm going to call the Just Vote No show. Along with that, for one of the segments, we're going to have Paul Mitchell on, who runs or is the leader of, I don't know what his title is.
Very articulate guy.
Oh, super articulate guy. But he is directing the Say No to Higher Taxes and Special Interest deals. And he's going to be on it for one segment.
And he's not supported by a big construction company or federal or state monies or politicians for that matter.
I think most of this money is coming out of his pocket.
Yeah.
But when you're seeing the Just Vote No signs or Vote No signs, a lot of it's coming from him personally because he's really invested himself in stopping this train.
And again, giving his side, and you'll give that opposing side an argument because all you're seeing on television for the most part, I mean, you can see an occasional TV ad, but for the most part, you're seeing these basically the folks who are going to get the money from the government paid for ads.
Matt Wiedenoff, who does some of our moves the show on to YouTube for us and all that, he's messaging me. He says government creates greed and envy.
Well stated, Matt. Very well stated.
I think he's spot on.
Yeah. Well, again, and that's how you attract the money and the power. You say, I'm going to get rid of the greed and envy if you give me more power and more money. I'm going to stop those people who you are envious of.
But greed, envy is to me is part of classism.
You bet.
And so when you look at how government, and not just government, but people that are wanting to get out their own votes, they'll break people down into as many small segments as they can so that they can deliver the right message to this special interest group or segment.
Divide and conquer.
It's divide and conquer. So they've got 23 little groups, and they can tell each one what that little group wants to hear.
And the other groups are demonized.
If you're outside, if you're not part of those 20. But the interesting part is if you follow those people from group to group, they say different things to each group that sometimes conflict pretty harsh.
And when they're exposed, for some reason, their supporters doesn't seem to bother them at all.
I get people angry with me because I push back so hard on classism. I think classism is about the ugliest politics that America's ever had to endure.
Birthday boy Vladimir Lenin said this: there are no morals in politics. The is only experience. A scoundrel may be of use because he is a scoundrel.
Ottawa County Patriots meeting tomorrow night at 7 o'clock down in Holland. You can find them at the OttawaCountyPatriots.org. They'll give you more information there. And I think that's going to really help you decide if you're on the bubble one way or another because they've done a great job at getting people in.
So will next Wednesday show.
Next Wednesday.
Encourage your friends to listen next Wednesday.
Paul Mitchell will be here with us next week. I'll be here. We're going to say just vote no. That's what we're going to do. So in the meantime, find us on Facebook. Find us on Twitter. Talk to you next week, folks. Have a great week.
Renegade River in Spring Lake wants to buy your used handguns and hunting guns. Renegade River, your hunting, camping, and survival store. Stop in and check out their new and used firearms, sporting goods, Army and Navy supplies, and survival gear. Downtown Spring Lake, next to the police station.